This show is sponsored by Infinite Zeal Syndicate. You can follow him on Twitter @_Infinite Zeal. He is a great liberty-minded fella that just wants to share the message of liberty and also has fantastic merch like this hat I'm wearing right now. You see me wear it on every show. He's a great gentleman, and I highly suggest you give him a follow because he's one of the good ones, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's get on with the show. Welcome to the BudsnReality Show. I'm Sean Collins, the guy with a lot to say. And the Mises Caucus has finally chosen a presidential candidate, and I happen to have him right here on the show right now, Mr. Michael Rectenwald. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Sean.
I appreciate you coming on and giving us your time. Let's talk about you a little bit. I know you are an author. I know you're a public speaker, but after that, I would like you to give yourself a bio.
Yeah, I mean, I am a author, public speaker. I'm a distinguished fellow at Hillsdale College, a former NYU professor, a author of many books. As I've said, I'm also a writer for the Mises Institute and a podcaster for the Mises Institute. So I've been really doing work in the liberty movement. I've written 5 books from a libertarian perspective, and now I'm running for president in order to wreck the regime.
Okay, I dig that. I dig wrecking the regime because a lot of us have had enough of the nonsense of the duopoly asshats or the uniparty or whatever you want to call them. But ever since you made your presidential announcement, I've been seeing you make your rounds on the podcast circuit. You seem to be very focused on local government and decentralization, which is something I preach on this show all the time. Decentralization and nullification is something I go hard on all the time. But if local is your focus, why run for president rather than mayor, city clerk, school board, sheriff, etc.?
Let's go. Because that's a great question. I'm leading a movement as the spokesperson for this, the top of the ticket spokesperson to bring localism and decentralization and nullification to the public consciousness through my campaign, and to bring on candidates who will run with me at the local level to wreck the regime from the local level up. The thing is, the reason the local level is so important is that in order to, create the kind of world that these statists are trying to create, they need to drive everything through the local level. They actually have to bring. Are you still there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm here.
My picture disappeared. Anyway, let me see what happened here.
They
have to bring. Oh, there you are. Sorry. They have to drive all their policies and crazy plans through the local level. So nothing happens unless the local level is actually complicit in it happening. So what we need to do is get people in place in these local offices, school board, sheriff, police force, and local township and county governance positions to resist the central government and to allow people to live in liberty in their locales, and then to cross-pollinate with each other, to transact various transactions across these localities. These are kind of parallel structures that need to be established to the centralized enforcement regime, where people are able to have a free market, have individual rights, and not have their rights infringed upon by the central behemoth called the central government. So that's why localism is so important. Nothing happens unless it's driven into the fabric of society by the global elites and the state.
Which I will definitely agree with on that. Local government is so important, and people don't realize how important that really is. Something I like to drive home is, local governments are in charge of your local businesses. And without local businesses, there is no desire for people to come into your town. And if there's no desire for people to come into your town, there's no desire to drive up your home value. And this is all intertwined, in itself and with everything. And a lot of people don't think about this. So, when it comes to localities and stuff like that, I'm all for it. I would love to see, libertarian mayors, school board, and sheriff especially, because the sheriffs are going to be the ones who really drive things home on tier, because they're the ones who are supposedly, quote unquote, supposed to be, enforcing these laws by these tyrants. And so local sheriffs and such, our local police forces will say, no, we're not doing this.
Yes.
Which is starting to happen in Michigan right now. I'm here in Michigan, one of the most communist states in America right now. It's not even close. We're right behind California. So when it comes to, local sheriffs putting their foot down, saying, we're not enforcing this bullshit, I stand behind it, but so let's go here. Hypothetically, you win the election, right?
Yeah.
And I know it's far-fetched, everybody's like, oh, blah, 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 libertarians.
Yeah. I've called it Fantasy Island. Yes, go ahead.
That's fine. That's fine. It can be a fantasy island. But the fact of the matter is, I happen to live in one of probably the most liberal area of Michigan. Honestly, to paint a picture for you, there's pride marches all the time. There's pride flags everywhere. This is where I'm at. I'm just outside of Detroit. Okay. It's just one of those things.
Yeah.
But I go out in public and talk to people, and I wear t-shirts like this that say read Rothbard. And, people ask me questions and dig into things and such. And the status quo is that we have seen enough of this bullshit. That is the status quo, even in liberal America here, honestly.
I would call it illiberal leftism, but illiberal leftist America. Yeah.
But so that being said, hypothetically, you win because anything is possible. What are you doing on day one, and how are you going to do it?
I'm going to pardon Julian Assange. I'm going to pardon. Snowden. I'm going to start the process of auditing the Fed and then abolishing it. I'm going to repeal the legal tender law so that the U.S. dollar is not the only legal tender, and I'm going to allow for competitive banking and currencies from the beginning of my administration. I'm going to take apart and dismantle the FBI, the CIA, the ATF, and all these alphabet agencies that are nothing but oppressors of people. But the Fed is the key, because the Fed is printing the money that's destroying the economy, driving up the inflation rate, and also, handing out money to their favorite partners, and inflating our currency, ruining our standard of living. They're monopolists over money. They're counterfeiters. They need to be dismantled and gotten rid of right away. So the Fed is, after these pardons that I would do, Snowden and Assange. After
what about Ross Ulbricht?
Who's that?
What about Ross Ulbricht?
Yes, he would be also pardoned.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So these people did nothing wrong, and they actually are heroes, most of them, Snowden in particular and Assange. So they get pardoned right away. And that's easy. All that stuff is set up. If I'm on the path to victory, or even before that, I'll have all of these policies in place, and executive orders to do these pardons. So that's kind of day one. Taking apart the Fed would be a big project, and dismantling it and eradicating it would be my first order of business after pardoning these people. Then I'd go after the CIA, the FBI, the ATF, CDC, the whole bastion of alphabet agencies that are working against us, that are policing and surveilling us, that are instituting unconstitutional mandates, that will do it again in the future, that are harassing, torturing, and arresting innocent people, They are politicized through and through, so they are useless to the American public. They should be gone.
Now, you hit the nail on the head with ending the Fed.
Yeah.
And libertarians love talking about ending the Fed, which in reality, it really needs to be burned to the fucking ground. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Right. There's no redeeming value there at all.
But how are you going to make that happen when they're the most powerful entity in this entire world? Nobody is ending the Fed with a swipe of a pen. It's just not going to happen like that. And to be quite frank, ending the Fed would probably take some sort of military intervention because there's so much more involved with the Federal Reserve than just, that.
They're funding the wars. Yeah, they fund the military industrial complex. They bleed the American public on a daily basis. They have led to the decline of our civilization, I would argue. They're destroying the fabric of society by producing high time preference. That is, people have there's no spending savings value because inflation increases faster than the interest rates by far. So the Fed has to be abolished. And of course, that would take a tremendous artillery in order to do it. I wouldn't say necessarily military, but it's going to take a significant political will. And I would basically pass a bill to the Congress that would already be drafted and ask them to ratify it, and then move it to the Senate and get rid of the Fed. And then we'll see who the real enemies of the people are. Those people that say no are obvious enemies of the people, and we show who they are, and we show their interest in keeping the Fed alive. We show what they're about to the American people. This is required in order to get rid of all these villains from the government.
Amen to that. So from there, would you be willing as a president to put us back on the gold standard? But not only the gold standard, well, I think the gold standard should be the end all be all, period. Because that worked for so many years and it kept the government from spending outside of their means. The gold standard kept the government in check. That's why they got rid of it.
Yes, I would put the U.S. government on the gold standard, but I would also, with the dollar, but I also would allow private competing currencies to exist, like Bitcoin, and others, so that they are private currencies issued by various establishments. In the case of gold-backed currencies, basically allowing competitive currencies to exist and to flourish in the country. And this erodes the Fed's power itself. It undermines their monopoly on the currency, and that's what we have is a monopoly on currency. That monopoly has to end, and that's done by striking the legal tender law.
Okay. But that being said, would it just be Bitcoin, or would it be other cryptos that you would be?
Well, it depends.
Would you be okay with multiple forms of currency? Is what I'm saying.
I'd be okay with multiple forms of currency. It really is up to the networks to. It's up to the networks what currency they'll accept as a medium of exchange. So, if some community wanted strictly, monetary gold or silver, they could use that. If some communities wanted Bitcoin exclusively, they could use that. If other communities wanted some other currency altogether, and they agree on that as a currency, they can do that. We need competitive currencies, competitive banking, and no monopoly on banking and currencies.
So what you're saying is you are pro decentralization of all money.
Absolutely. Pro decentralization of money in toto.
Well, because there's a big difference between currency and money. And a lot of people
get
that misconstrued. Like, money is something that holds its value. It's solid. It's very hard to duplicate, to where currency can be counterfeited. It's paper money like we have now. Every dollar that we have to this day is counterfeit. Ron Paul talks about it all the time. You know, he's been talking about this for 40 fucking years now at this point.
Yep. And I would say also, I would strike down or preemptively strike down the possibility of a central bank digital currency. I would strike that down before it became a possibility. The Biden administration has floated the idea of instituting a central bank digital currency in Executive Order 14,067. And that has to be stopped. The central bank digital currency would close the totalitarian circle in the United States. It has to, that cannot happen. We must strike it down. Of course, that would be stricken down with the Fed itself. They wouldn't be able to issue a central bank digital currency if in fact they didn't exist.
And that's a fact, Jack. Like, that's just what it is. But like, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, Americans are in a situation where, you know, they're really, really pushing this right now. And I'm under the impression, and a lot of us are under the impression that the moment they try to really, really, really push the CBDC, that's the point where we need to stack up and rack up. We're going to war.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be
pretty. Yeah, we cannot allow the CBDC. But in advance of that, and I would argue that people should be doing this now, is they ought to be establishing parallel currencies that they're using in their networks at the moment, right now. So that if a CBDC were to become in place by the time I got in office, they would already have these alternate currencies functioning. And then ending this, you know, getting rid of the CBDC, we would just then get rid of the legal tender laws and allow these other currencies to flourish.
Okay. Now, next up, let's talk about some foreign policy.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we're in a situation in America where, you know, the United States foreign policy could seriously get us all killed. And if it doesn't get us all killed, it's going to put us in a situation where there's going to be guerrillas on the streets with their guns to defend themselves, which nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to see that at the end of the day.
Right.
That is terrifying to every American, including myself. I don't want to have to do that, but I will to protect myself and my family. But, you know, going from there, what are you going to do to make this country stop sending people's kids to die for bankers' wars? Yes, I just said that, ladies and gentlemen, because that's exactly what these wars are bankers' wars. It's nothing to do with freedom or liberty.
Well, first of all, we got to look at the immediate situation here with Ukraine and the Ukraine war. This has to end, and it would end very quickly when all funding and arms and military intelligence are withdrawn from that conflict. The U.S. withdraws all funds and military intelligence and arms from that conflict. That would bring that to a halt. Right now, these people, the State Department, the military, and the heads of state are basically precipitating the possibility of a nuclear conflict, a nuclear war, which would end humanity. So this is the most pressing, immediate problem that we face. I don't think it's the number one problem, but it is the most exigent problem. That is the one that's most pressingly dangerous to us right now. We've got to get out of Ukraine. And that means getting all of the money and all of the funds and all the military assets and all the military intelligence assets out of that conflict and bring it back to a point where they can negotiate some peace, because this is totally dangerous. And right now, the U.S., what they're trying to do in Ukraine, they baited the Russians into Ukraine on purpose because they wanted to tie them up in a war for ages with insurgents, which they are feeding into the war. They want a constant insurgency. They want to create an Afghanistan for Russia in Ukraine. That's really the objective, to create an Afghanistan-like situation like the one that Russia got in, the USSR got into at the tail end of the Cold War, and the kind that the U.S. got into in the same place in the so-called War on Terror. So that stuff has got to stop. And these people are playing with our lives. This is how dangerous this regime is. They are endangering the lives of everybody on this planet. They must be stopped. This has to end.
Now, when you speak of the regime, are you just speaking of the shit leftards that are in here right now? Are you speaking of the Republicans that back these shit leftards?
No, it isn't just leftards.
Basis?
Yeah, it's not just leftards. It's the neocons. It's the whole state plus their beneficiaries, which includes the military-industrial complex, of course, and their accomplices. So that crosses party lines. It's not just Democrats, although the Democrats are running the uniparty at this time. That's been different in the past. We know that.
Right.
They weren't running it during the Iraq war and the war in Afghanistan. They are running it now, and they're dangerous for a lot of reasons. They're not only neocons, that is the left, so-called, is a neocon left, and but they're also destroying the domestic economy. These people are they're a serious danger to our life, our way of life. They're a danger to the economic welfare of U.S. citizens and the welfare of people the world around. So by regime, I'm referring to the state, its beneficiaries, and its accomplices, all of them, including Republicans, including neocons, which crosses both party lines, as we know. There are neocons in both parties. Hillary Clinton's a neocon. All these people, AOC is a neocon. Nancy Pelosi's a neocon. And so is Mitch McConnell, of course. And all of these people, it crosses party lines. These people are neocons, and they are absolutely an anathema to our well-being.
It's actually extremely scary. And Kevin McCarthy was also a neocon who actually just got ousted from the Speaker of the House. Thank God. I was no fan of McCarthy. He actually in my eyes, happens to be a Nazi weft puppet. That's what he is.
Yes, he is.
But, you talk about the market, and let's move on to the free market right now, or the so-called free market. Because
we don't have one.
Right. Yeah, anybody who knows better knows that this is far from free. Honestly, it's a monopolized market due to government intervention. What is your plan to free the market and bring competition back to it, for Christ's sake?
Well, all the collusion between the state and the corporate players must end. That means all of these associations, affiliations between, say, big tech and big pharma and the state, all of that's got to stop. All of the corporatocracy must be expunged from the system altogether. We can't have corporate welfare. We can't have corporate cartels running our show in collusion with the state. These have got to end. So that means big pharma, big tech, military industrial complex, all of this collusion must end. That means no association of the state with corporations whatsoever. In fact, the whole corporatocracy needs to come down. I think the corporate law that even gives companies corporate status by virtue of a legal mechanism needs to be eradicated altogether. There shouldn't be any protection for companies by the state at all.
But are you willing for the war that's going to come with it when you're trying to get these people out of the way of the market?
Yes, I'm ready to wage that war 100%. That's what this wreck of the regime is about. It's waging this war on all of these levels, including this corporatocracy and this corporate welfare and corporate bailouts and corporate preferences in the payments from the Fed. All of this stuff, they give out when the Fed prints all this money, the first recipients are the real beneficiaries, and those first recipients include their favorite corporate and banking partners, and those people have got to be that kind of favoritism in lending and distribution of wealth has to end.
But how are you going to do that? That's the $1 million question. Like, everybody in politics says, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, but they never say their plan for X, Y, and Z. So what is your plan for said situations?
Well, I mean, all of the laws that have come into play that have favored corporations and through actually using regulations as the means by which corporations capture various agencies, all of that has to go. All of these regulations. So I would get rid of the regulators. So the difference between my campaign and RFK's campaign is he thinks that the problem lies at the pull of the corporations. I think if you have the regulators, that's going to always lead to regulatory capture. So we got to get rid of the regulators. And that means, of course, the FDA and all of the other agencies that regulate corporations and behaviors. So any kind of regulation leads to market capture, leads to monopolization or cartels at the very least. And that's what we have. So get rid of regulators. Therefore, there's nothing in the state for them to buy. If they have no product to buy, they can't do their bidding. Get rid of the products that they're after. Get rid of the state handles. Get rid of the handles on the state that they take and manipulate. Those handles go away and there's nothing for them to manipulate.
Okay, okay. Now, before we move on to this next part of our interview, I'd like to say that people can change in major ways. I'm a product of change.
Yeah.
I was once a pro-war neocon myself who
Yep.
happened to be very wild. I got into all kinds of trouble with the law. Okay. That was my 20s. It was debauchery. It was drunk, fight, debauchery. That was my 20s. And
on
then
that note, I'll take a hit of my vape.
hell yeah, man. I appreciate that. And we don't call this show Buds in Reality for no reason. There's buds for a reason, my friend.
I got you, man.
But
they should
you
be
know,
totally legal and no war on drugs. But go on.
well, actually, let's go to that real quick because I'd like to touch on that. You know, there's before we go to this hard part. You know, I am a user of cannabis and psilocybin.
Good for you.
It's helped my life tremendously in so many ways, and we don't have enough time in the show to talk about this.
Yes, I know what you're getting at, though.
But the fact of the matter is that there's legalization and there's decriminalization. Weed is legal in Michigan. We're here where I'm at, but it's also a disaster for businesses to get licensing for rec. They can get their medical license all day, right? The one shop that I go to, the clinic in Detroit, who happens to be on the infamous 8 Mile, love those guys. But they got turned down for their recreational license. They've been able to sell medical for years. I'm a med card holder because I need it in my life. They recently got turned down for their rec license because they didn't rub enough elbows with the city council. But all the other places that did rub elbows with the city council have their rec license. And this is why decriminalization is such an important factor when it comes to medicine and or even drug use in general. Like, first off, they're playing God. They're saying that they are higher than the Almighty who put a plant in the earth to medicate us.
Somehow the state is better positioned and has more knowledge and the right to prohibit you from inducing into your own body what has been put on the earth by God Almighty.
Yes. So that's number one. But number two, the legalization factor is that they just want to get their grimy dick beaters on some tax money.
That's right. Absolutely.
You know, where
so I'm for decriminalization, getting rid of all licensing and necessary hoops and any involvement of the state in the drug market. The drug market should be opened up to free market producers who produce products without regulation, who label products for their consumers. Consumers can then choose what products they want to buy. There'll be competition for those drugs and amongst those producers. So the producers who make drugs will compete for their own market share, and they'll do it on the terms of basically wanting to produce the best product that is out there, the safest product as well. They'll label their products out of self-interest, and the users will take them out of self-interest. And that's the way it should be. No licensing, no bullshit with the government telling you who can sell what. No, get rid of all that. People should be able to sell drugs if they want to sell drugs, and people should be able to buy drugs if they want to buy drugs. Anybody should be able to introduce into their body. And at age 18, let's say, if the parents say that's what age they have to be, that's, the age of consent. So, but the state shouldn't be dictating that. It should be dictated at the home in terms of youth and adolescence, not by the state at all. They should have no business. They have no business in this at all.
Well, yeah, and the fact of the matter is, I have some very close friends to me that have some autistic children that have to be extremely violent. Okay, and cannabis helps those children from being so crazy or violent or whatever you may call it. I don't want to sound like an asshole. So, but like the cannabis helps these kids in those situations, but they got to jump through all kinds of hoops to give their own children said medication just to keep them from being like super violent or whatever it may be. I don't know the whole spectrum of autism and all that, but I know that I have friends in this situation where it's very hard for them to get medicine for their kids because in the meantime, these doctors are prescribing them methamphetamines to calm them get down, which is like, you're giving children methamphetamines. What the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, if parents think methamphetamines or, Adderall is better, then they could do that. But it shouldn't be up to the state to dictate what drugs are legal or permissible for this. And certainly this drives up the cost of everything. It drives up the cost of the drugs, the cost of access to them, having to go through doctors and all this nonsense. That all should be eradicated, 100%. So, when it comes to children and adolescents, I think it's up to the parents, or should be up to the parents, to determine what their kids consume. And that's it. There's no state involved.
I dig that. And I do apologize for my ADHD moment. I do have those from time to time. But
you too?
but let's go back to this. So, I'd like to say that, I'm a product of change. I'm a former neocon who was a pro-war, and I got myself into a whole world of trouble with the law.
Yeah.
I was a bad dude in my 20s. I was drinking, I was fighting, debauchery, all of it, but I happened to change my ways, and now I am an anti-war anarchist who happens to be a recluse that just wants to be left alone.
Absolutely. Okay? You have that perfect right. You should have that perfect right.
So now you
do have that perfect right, but they're infringing it, probably.
They infringe on everything. But you also have a past, which concerns some libertarians. And one of those pasts happens to be your political past. And we all have one of those. And if I'm not mistaken, you were once a socialist, yes?
Yes. Yes, okay. I was more of a Marxist theorist. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So now, what it is I had a lot of things wrong. And I admit that I was wrong. I had a lot of ideas that were mistaken, starting from the idea that socialism was the best way of producing and distributing wealth. I did not understand that the free market is the best way of producing and distributing wealth. And in fact, anything short of that is disastrous and deadly. So, I believed, from ethical standpoint, that Marxism was a superior ethical political ideology. I thought that the capitalist class was stealing from the working class on a moment by moment basis at the point of production. I thought that the ruling class was the so-called capitalist class. I didn't understand that there is a class warfare. There is a class warfare, but the capitalist class per se is not the exploiter. The exploiter is the state and its beneficiaries and accomplices. That's who's taking money from people without a contract, with no rights to do so, and has a monopoly on violence, has a monopoly over protection, territorial protection, and protection within territories. That is the true ruling class, and that is the class that has to be beaten in the class war. So I still hold on to the class war idea, but it's now from a totally different perspective. I just had the wrong ideas of who was doing what. I didn't recognize the state as the oppressor that it is, as the exploiter that it is, as the monstrosity that it is. And I came to understand that through some serious personal trauma, frankly, from the left. They traumatized me. I saw what a kind of totalitarians they were at base, and that they were trying to shut down my speech and thought. They even said that I was guilty for the structure and content of my thinking. So when I heard that from them, and that came out of the university, NYU, I recognized what I was dealing with, and I became a civil libertarian in a heartbeat, really. And then I went into the economic and social and political elements of libertarianism, and soon converted to a political and economic libertarian. And I have been so committed to that since, that I think that I'm the most vehement anti-Marxist that exists. I hate Marxism more than anybody else. And there's nobody better to fight against Marxism and unconscious Marxism than a former Marxist. We've seen this time and time again. Thomas Sowell, Whittaker Chambers, you name it, there's a whole slew of them. David Horowitz, now he's a neocon, but at least he turned again against Marxism. But can we put this on pause, because my computer is I forgot it needs charged.
Oh yeah, man.
Yeah, let me get the charger so I don't die.
Clothing is a great way to express yourself and strike up conversations. Anarchy Wear happens to have things that do both, such as this shirt that says Read Rothbard. I love this shirt more than anything because it struck up the most conversations I've had with people because they want to know who he is. And it's a great way to spread the message. Also, they have things like this behind me. Yes, it really says that. And they also have t-shirts and hoodies that say that as well. I have them all. You can find them at Anarchy Wear, on Twitter at Anarchy Wear, on Facebook at AnarchyWear.ca, and also Instagram at AnarchyWear.ca. I would love for you to check them out. Get yourself some gear, get yourself some banners. They're great people. They love liberty. I highly suggest you check them out.
So I was mistaken. I just had some wrong analysis, and I gotta, in my favor, I will say that, look, I was, indoctrinated in the university system, not so much in undergrad, but as a graduate student from 1993 through 2004, in which they're throwing Marxism at you from every direction you can imagine, plus postmodernism and feminism and other tangents related, cogent, I should say, coterminous and very connected ideologies. All of that was coming at me on an endless basis, and I started to think it was right. And I have atoned for that past by being one of the most fierce anti-communists, pro-liberty, pro-market, pro-property proponents out there. And I've written 5 books now from that perspective, and I'm just growing in force in that direction. And it comes, when you see things from the Marxist standpoint, and then you see the truth, it shines even brighter in contrast to what you thought. And that makes you more powerful as an exponent of libertarian values.
Okay. Now going on from there, there's also claims that you work for DARPA, which stands for
yeah.
Let me just get this out there. Not everybody knows. So a lot of my listeners, I don't want to say most, but a lot of my listeners are people who aren't necessarily libertarians, anarchists, whatever. There are people who are seeking something different. My analytics teach that. But the DARPA stands for Defense Advanced Research Projects Agencies.
Yeah.
Which is a government-funded agency. There's some claims that you did some work for them, or that you did work for them. What would you like to say about those claims? Let's put this out there right now.
It's ludicrous. It's like saying that somebody who you know, first of all, I didn't work for DARPA. I worked for the Robotics Institute at Carnegie Mellon University in an AI lab while I was writing my dissertation. It was a job that I took to help support my family while I was going through graduate school. The salient point here is to note that I had 3 children while going through graduate school for 10 years. So I always had to get jobs to make extra money because, you know, as a PhD student, you were paid like $12,000 from the department where you worked. So I couldn't live on $12,000 and I didn't want to take student loans. So what I did is worked for a Robotics Institute lab. They happened to have contracts, not contracts, but they had funding from numerous agencies, but not all governmental. They had a lot of funding sources. One of them happened to be DARPA. What did I do for that lab? I wrote for the public consumption about the programs that they were developing. And this was called the Intelligent Software Agents Lab. And some of the things they were doing were supposed to have military applications, but never did any of the programs that they wrote ever get implemented. But the thing is here, I was at the same time an anti-war activist. As a matter of fact, I spoke in New York against the war before it even started on President's Day, February 2001. I was speaking against the war. And in fact, while there was a general sitting 5 feet from me in the lab while they were showing him what they called it was a display of the software. At that time, I was writing anti-war pages for a website for a group that I was heading. And that was a very anti-war group. I should say that, you know, if somebody's former associations with something like the government or a disqualification, then I would say almost every candidate has been disqualified in advance. I was anti-war from the age of 9 through the present. I actually was anti-Vietnam War. I was anti the first Gulf War. I was anti the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, and I was an activist against the wars. And, you know, and this is not because I came from an anti-war leftist family. My father was a Reagan Democrat. He actually bought the Cold War propaganda. I never bought it. So I never bought the state's propaganda, even as a child. And as a leftist, I didn't buy the state's propaganda. Unlike today's leftists who are all gung-ho pro-war neocons. I never, ever supported war. Did maybe $50 out of my paycheck come from DARPA at that time? Yeah, probably. But that's not because I worked for DARPA. I worked for the Robotics Institute, who had funders, one of them was, of which was DARPA. At the same time, other candidates actually were in the war, so nobody's giving them grief. And they were adults. So as a child, I was anti-war. At 15, at 12, at 19, I was always anti-war. And I was very vociferous about it.
Well, that's why I kind of gave my story, like people can change and whatnot, because people can change. And that's just kind of how it goes. But, there's also some claims that you had made some funding to Donald Trump.
Yeah, there was 2 instances in which I gave money to Trump. And one of them was when at the election, which I do believe all kind of chicanery went on. And the other one was when he was indicted. And there were $20 to $25 donations. Those were really acts of spite against the regime, who is not only, despite whatever you think of Trump and his supporters, the state is completely out of control with reference to this. They are persecuting his supporters, the January 6th protesters, by putting them in gulags for 12, 15, 17 years, longer than gulag sentences, for political expression. No matter what you think about them, whether they're dupes of Trump, however mistaken they are, that doesn't exonerate the state from what it's doing, which is absolutely repugnant and totalitarian at base. That's why I donated twice to Trump.
Okay. Okay. This is just questions I'm asking.
And speaking of that, like even other libertarians, very pronounced libertarians, I'm not going to say their names, so I don't want to indict anybody by accident, have said they've even considered voting for Trump in 2024 just out of spite against the regime. Not that I would, and I wasn't ever going to vote for Trump in 2024 or 2020, but I understand that sentiment. And so people need to understand political sentiment sometimes is about spite and revenge against the enemy. And it isn't necessarily in favor of somebody, but it's a kind of, it's like, why did I call myself, when I came out on Twitter, as anti-PC NYU prof, I also called myself a deplorable NYU professor. Why I did that was not because of support for Trump. It was support for the people that were being denigrated by the elites, Trump's followers, called the basket of deplorables, the middle states people that were treated like garbage, middle class people that have been vilified and now called domestic terrorists by this regime. That is unconscionable. And so that's why I did that. I have nothing to hide about any of it.
Well, I totally get that. And to be honest, like, I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I was a libertarian from 2008 on. I voted for Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. Gary Johnson really rubbed me the wrong way. And there was no way in hell I was voting Democrat. I'm a never Democrat. I was raised a Southern Baptist kid, and I love my guns. We're not voting for these clowns. So, and Gary Johnson just wasn't my dude. So I'm like, I'm going to vote for Trump just because she can't get in. But I really thought she was going to win. Like, honestly, I didn't think Donald Trump was going to win in 2016. I didn't think it was even going to be close.
Yeah, right. I didn't think so either. And I voted for Trump in 2016 too, out of spite for Clinton and that whole nasty elitist globalist statist cadre that opposed him. And that's not to say Trump is legitimate opposition. He's probably controlled opposition unbeknownst to him, but that's beside the point. It was a spite vote. It wasn't really anything else. And that's sometimes the way politics goes.
And politics is a funny game. And, a lot of people get scared. There's a lot of people who claim to be libertarians, but won't vote libertarian because they're scared. And that's where I was in 2016. And I immediately regretted it. And, I jumped on the Joe Jorgensen bandwagon in 2020. I donated to her campaign. I still have the signs right over here. But, it's one of those things where, like, it's scary being a voter, and it's scary to be a person who is politically aware of what's happening, because what's coming and how it's going to be, but there's so much, chirping and chirp in your ear going, do this, do this, do this, do this, and you fall into it. I fell into that trap in 2016. I'll never do it again. It's either I vote libertarian or I don't vote at all. That's how this is going to go from here on out for the rest of my life.
So, I mean, I've heard libertarians, very prominent ones, advising against people voting for the libertarian candidate in 2020 if they were in a swing state. They were told to vote for Trump. I would never advise that, and I'm out here to get votes from both parties and all the independents that are running now. I'm after all the votes I can get. I don't care what party they come from, but I think I can pull people from everywhere, especially from the Trumpist cadre, because those are disaffected anti-establishment people now, and they become anti-war. And so they can be won over to the idea of full-fledged liberty and the whole principles behind what we stand for and the policies that we stand for, which are consistent and principled all the way through, not like Trump, who's a protectionist in terms of trade. He would put up tariffs against China, causing more tensions. He's against all kinds of things that I would not at all favor. I want free trade, 100% free trade.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, we're not going to end the show on this note. We're not doing it that way. So let's go here. You happen to be talking to one of the biggest music and book nerds of all time. I will give myself that title because obviously I got some records behind me, and you know, I happen to have this book here too, The Creature of Jekyll Island.
Oh, you have that?
You better read that.
He's a friend of mine. The author is a friend of mine.
Oh my God, G. Edward Griffin, I would love
Yeah,
to.
Griffin, I've spoken at some of his events, and I've talked to him, and he loves me. We're good friends.
Man, if I could have Griffin on this show, I would say I have made it in life, honestly, because this book right here is life-changing. Everyone needs to read it. It needs to be taught in high schools. It needs to be taught in universities. It is very eye-opening on the banking system. I am very much against the banking system because this book already was, but this book solidified it. But that being said, you know, while you're out campaigning and you're out damning the man and hating the state, what is Michael Rectenwald listening to while he is doing his thing? What is your vice for music, man?
Oh, what's my musical taste? Well, I have to say that I have two sons that are musicians, and they're very good. One of them was very, very far along in the music business when he decided to change his direction. He was a friend of Mac Miller's, in fact, his best friend from childhood, and promoted heavily by Mac before Mac died of an overdose on fentanyl. So I listen to my son's stuff. Okay. I listen, I like Bob Dylan a lot, although not the early stuff like Blowing in the Wind and The Times They Aren't Changing. I like the later stuff, where he's become red pilled big time. And there was a song that he wrote, I think it was 1965 or 3 to 5, right in there. It's called My Back Pages, in which he says, I used to believe all this nonsense like equality. I spoke their word as if a wedding vow, but I was so much younger then. I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. That is the turning point of his whole career. And now he comes out and swinging at some of our enemies, and not buying into leftist bullshit any longer. And I think I like, I like some rap. I gotta say I like some rap. I like some of the older rap, like Straight Out Compton and stuff like that.
Oh, NWA, okay.
Yeah, NWA. I also like I like this new Oliver Anthony guy. I think that song North Richmond, north of Richmond.
That spoke to everyone's heart, I think. I think that spoke to every working man's heart that is across from coast to coast. You know, he hit the nail on the head. And there's a lot of musicians out there that talk about government bullshit and whatever, blah, blah, blah. This man is out there talking about the debasement of the dollar and just trying to get by like a normal person every day. And that
I think it was like a libertarian anthem. It was only missing a few things, like about the the war mongers and their wealth accrual. He did hit the Fed. He did hit the welfare state. Some people say too hard, that he beat down on the poor. But there was something to it. What he was saying is, why am I being robbed to pay these people? That makes sense. I think they're not the biggest target, though. I think the military-industrial complex, the Fed, these people need to be hit hard. I would leave the poor out of it if I had a choice. But it's his song, so I still think it's a pretty good libertarian anthem.
Oh, me too. Me too. I reached out to him a couple times. Apparently, I'm not cool enough for him because I never got an answer. But whatever. But and lastly, you're an author. So I got to give a shout out to my Liberty Book Club, man. I started with one of my sponsors, the Infinite Zeal. He and I started this Liberty Book Club, and it's all about sharing liberty-minded reads to get the message across. And it's cool to learn other shit. People, there's certain, targets where they read this, or this, but then other people can come in and be like, well, I read this, and this. And so it's a great way to spread the message. Who is your favorite liberty-minded author?
Well, it's a toss-up, actually. It's a toss-up between Rothbard and Hoppe.
Okay.
Rothbard, pardon?
I said, okay, I'm a huge Rothbardian, so I'm agreeing with you. Right.
Rothbard is essential for getting, for graduating into Hoppe, but Hoppe's really caps it, man. So his book, Democracy, the God That Failed, is just an absolute masterpiece. And then Hoppe, otherwise Hoppe's done some great work on what he calls Austrian class analysis. It's very good stuff, but that's just an essay called Marxist and Austrian Class Analysis. But there's a great book, of course, by Murray Rothbard called Anatomy of the State. And that's like a primer. You got to read that. If you don't read that, you don't know anything about the state, or you haven't really thought it all through, because Rothbard lays it out in a beautiful short treatise. And it's just, every line is cutting. I mean, every line is a knife to the state's heart.
And it's a short read. You could read that in a day if you wanted to.
Oh, I read it in one sitting in about an hour and a half.
Nice.
Yeah, and then
I like For a New Liberty. I think that's a long.
That's a great book too, For a New Liberty, and then Man, Economy, and the State is a great book. That's
the Case Against the Fed. The Case Against the Fed by Murray Rothbard. Oh my God.
Yeah, that too. So there's a lot there, but going a little bit outside of the canon of libertarianism, I've got to say, like, some of my favorite authors. Otherwise, I like Dostoevsky. He's a great author. His book, Crime and Punishment, is probably the best novel ever written. And I also like his book, Notes from Underground, a fantastic book. I read pretty broadly, so I do have the canon of libertarianism pretty much under belt, and I go back to it over and over. I keep reading parts of books like Democracy, the God That Failed. I was reading it today, reading over some of his stuff. It's so good. But that's I'd say really the main book that you gotta read is Anatomy of the State if you want to really get the heart of it.
Rothbard was based before based was ever a thing. Like,
oh yeah. Now, there's been some things where politically he said some things at different times that weren't exactly right. But I mean, look, the guy had a long career trying every kind of political angle he could to get the message of libertarianism across. And so he had some alliances that were unfortunate, and some support of Buchanan and things like that for a very short time.
Later, Rothbard got a little weird. I'll say that. Later, Rothbard got, he kind of got into that status feel a little bit towards the end. But I mean, as a collective and as a whole, Rothbard's one of the greats, along with
his oeuvre is incredible. And then there's a great book that he wrote. It's probably not as well read. It's History of Austrian Economics, and he goes. It's kind of, I think it's 2 to 3 volumes. I've been reading volume 2, and he just demolishes all these competing economic theories. And it's beautiful. I mean, this guy was a serious scholar as well. Very serious scholar, not just a polemicist.
Yeah, man. I love those old school guys. Him, Mises, Hazlitt, Hayek.
Mises as well, of course. I mean, Mises is how I first converted to economic libertarianism. And that book that did that was Socialism and Economic and Sociological Analysis. That book crushed it. That's where you can find his discourse on the calculation problem, and a lot else about socialism, which he destroys in that book. That book set me free. That's the book that set me free from socialism.
I'm glad you said that, man. I'm really glad you said that, because that, like I said, people can change. And a lot of times, it takes books. For me, what in my neoconservative days, George W. did this to me.
Yeah.
George W. did this to me. I'm in my mid 40s now. He was my first presidential candidate I ever got to vote for. I voted for him twice. I backed the war, and then I was very let down by that. And then, I was searching for something different, and being a never Democrat, I wasn't going to go that route. And then I happened to see this crazy old man on TV talking about abolishing, the IRS and ending the Federal Reserve. And I'm like, who the hell is this guy?
Yeah.
And it happened to be Ron Paul.
That was a great switch for you. Yeah. I remember when George W. Bush ran, I took my son and his friend, Mac Miller, actually. We went around, and not in support of Democrats, because I knew George W. Bush was going to start a massive war, and I knew he was going to bomb Iraq. So we went around stealing Bush signs from people's yards and paintballing their houses.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, Mac Miller was part of that, and his mother actually thanked me for taking him along to do that.
No shit, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
That is quite hilarious.
Yeah.
But Michael Rectenwald, thank you so much for your time. I'm glad, the people get to hear you out on all fronts. I happen to, some of those things I brought up on foreign policy and the Fed and all that happen to be personal things to me, because I happen to believe that, we're in a situation where, our government is involved in culture wars.
Yeah, that's true. They are.
And to be quite frank, in my personal opinion, culture wars don't mean a fucking thing.
They don't mean anything, except they're weaponizing them in order to do things to us economically as well. They really want to beat down any kind of independent, non-dependent people. So anybody that's not dependent on the state, they really want to bludgeon you with this crap, and to beat you down. They weaponize these minorities on purpose to beat you over the head with. And this is a war against the I don't know what else to call it, the working middle class, aspiring middle class. I don't know. It's a war against the majority in any case. And they want to destroy it because they want to destroy anybody that's not dependent on them. I think that's really what it comes down to.
But the craziest thing is like, for me, when it comes to not only presidential candidates, but like government in general, is like, I want sound policies. I don't care about culture wars. I don't care if people want to be gay, straight, trans.
Neither do I. Absolutely.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Leave everybody the fuck alone.
Right.
Give us some strong policies. I want strong fiscal policy. I want to bring the troops home. I want to end bankers' wars. I want the economy to flourish.
Right. Can you imagine how rich this country and this world would be if it weren't for the state, and how much they have sucked and have served as a parasite, sucking the blood out of people for all this time? You imagine we would be living in a veritable cornucopia. There would be no want or hunger anywhere. The state is the most oppressive apparatus that's ever come into existence on the face of the earth.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly. They're in the way of everything. They're in the way of the market. They are in the way of freedom. They are in the way of liberty. They are in the way of healthcare. They're in the way of education.
They're a vampire. They're a parasite they're a parasite of everything. They're parasites. And once that comes clean home to you, you realize what parasitic vampires they are. And then you really have, as Rothbard put it, you got to have this militant hatred for the state. That's what's required. That's the radicalism that's required. And he even said it doesn't matter whether you're a minarchist or an anarchist. As long as you have that radical militant hatred for the state, you're valuable. So that's where I'm coming from. I am an anarchist, but I have a radical hatred for the state.
Most Mises Caucus people happen to be anarchists or anti.
Yes,
that's one of those things. True. You know what I mean? I'm one of those. I don't stake claim to a caucus or anything like that. I am here
I
for,
understand.
I'm here for the cause. I am here for freedom and liberty for all Americans, or all people that are coming here to America to find a better way. I don't necessarily need a caucus to guide me. I am here for the people. This is
Yeah,
why I do what I do, and
sure.
that's that. But Michael, I appreciate your time. I wish you luck on your campaign.
Yes. Can I just throw out my campaign
Yes,
website address?
let's
Okay.
plug.
It's
I
very,
want to give you a plug. Yes.
yeah, RecTheRegime, RecTheRegime.com. Everything's there. RecTheRegime.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Thank you so much. Until next time, y'all, peace, love, and liberty. Please be button mashers. Please be button mashers. Like, share, follow, subscribe to all things. I love you guys very much. Peace, love, and liberty, y'all. Be good.